A series so dark it almost killed the franchise. A series with so much interpersonal conflict it almost killed the franchise. A series so serious it almost killed the franchise. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Star Trek Deep Space Nine is a live-action television series that ran 176 episodes over 7 seasons from 1993 to 1999. It broke the Star Trek mold that depicted the future as a well-lit utopia for mankind as we explored the galaxy, instead getting down and dirty in the trenches of real life on the edge of intergalactic war and a wormhole. 3 years after a deadly encounter with the Borg that cost him his wife, Commander Benjamin Sisko is taking command of the Federation space station Deep Space Nine, orbiting the planet Bajor, bringing with him his teenage son Jake and an absolute seething hatred for Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Deep Space Nine only recently came under Federation control. At the request of the Provisional Government, Starfleet has agreed to help the citizens of Bajor deal with the aftermath of the recently concluded war against the Cardassians. See, for the last 60 years, the Cardassians have occupied Bajor despite relentless resistance from the Bajorans. The Cardassians left after stripping the planet of all its natural resources. A similar tactic they applied to Deep Space Nine itself. On their way out, the Cardassians stripped the space station of nearly all of its valuable components except basic life support. An assignment that Commander Sisko reluctantly accepted now includes recovery and reconstruction. He's also going to have to contend with the inhabitants of the station, which include travelers from all over the galaxy with all manner of intentions: politicians, shopkeepers, teachers, soldiers, gamblers, and criminals. Not to mention his own crew, some of whom aren't exactly excited that the Federation is inserting itself into local affairs. And as if that wasn't enough to deal with, it turns out that the planet Bajor and Deep Space Nine are located right next to the only known stable wormhole in the galaxy, a pipeline created by non-corporeal life forms that exist outside of time, themselves occupying multiple spaces at once, and are worshipped by the Bajorans as gods. Commander Sisko is going to have to leverage his status as the Bajorans' prophesied emissary to the gods to juggle all of that and somehow be a good single dad at the same time. His new home is the crossroads between the Federation, Bajorans, Cardassians, Klingons, Romulans, and introducing the Dominion, all right now at Deep Space Nine. Thank you to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description below and use code TOYGALAXY for $5 off your order today. Look, I'm doing my best to exercise and eat better, but I have a very busy schedule and it's not as easy to do it as it is to say you want to do it. At best, I get a real solid workout in every other week. Maybe I'm not nailing the exercise part, but the eating better is a lot easier with Magic Spoon. It's got the same look and taste of the cereal I ate as a kid when exercising just meant going outside and riding my bike all day until the streetlights came on. Magic Spoon has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 to 5 net grams of carbs in each serving, just 140 calories. It's keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, and soy-free. Magic Spoon cereal comes in best-selling flavors like cocoa, frosted peanut butter, or my favorite, fruity. Magic Spoon treats are available in marshmallow, chocolatey, peanut butter, and 2 new flavors, double chocolate and blueberry muffin. Magic Spoon is backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, so if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Magic Spoon also ships to Canada and the UK. You can also find it in your nearest grocery store. So click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen and use code TOYGALAXY for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/TOYGALAXY to save $5 off your order today. And thanks again to Magic Spoon. Star Trek as a franchise began in 1966 with what is now known as Star Trek, the original series created by veteran television writer Gene Roddenberry. 79 episodes aired on NBC over 3 seasons from 1966 to 1969, canceled by NBC for supposedly low ratings. Star Trek then made a brief surprise return in 1973 with Star Trek the Animated Series. 22 episodes over 2 seasons featuring the voices of the original series cast ran through 1974, at which time the franchise took a break before heading to the big screen. In 1979, Star Trek the Motion Picture kicked off a brand new era as the crew of the Enterprise became movie stars. 3 more films were released through the 20th anniversary of the franchise in 1986. In 1987, The Next Generation kicked off with Star Trek The Next Generation. The transition back to television was a move made to keep the franchise healthy and profitable heading into its 3rd decade. The increasing ages and increasing salaries of the original cast had become prohibitive to producing new movies. Paramount saw that the only way for Star Trek to survive was to start over. 2 more movies featuring the original cast in 1989 and 1991 continued the trend of increasing costs and decreasing revenues, while Star Trek The Next Generation continued the mission on TV. In 1991, Brandon Tartikoff left as the head of NBC's entertainment division to become the chairman of Paramount Pictures, owners of the Star Trek franchise. Paramount was in disarray from infighting between executives, a looming writer's strike, and a series of box office disappointments, which included the William Shatner-directed Star Trek V: The Final Frontier and the Chinatown sequel, The Two Jakes, but did not include Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, which did just fine, thank you, grossing a bit over $14 million against a budget of $5 million. Despite all the front office problems, Star Trek was overall still a driver of ticket sales and television ratings. It was something for Tartikoff to build on, and not for nothing, but this wasn't the first time Tartikoff walked into a studio on fire. Tartikoff was previously the president of NBC Entertainment. In 1981, at just 32 years old, he was the youngest person to ever serve in that capacity. During his tenure, NBC became a juggernaut of television programming with shows like Hill Street Blues, LA Law, Law and Order, Family Ties, The Cosby Show, Cheers, Seinfeld, Knight Rider, The A-Team, Saint Elsewhere, and ALF. Recognizing the value of Star Trek, Tartikoff tasked Star Trek Next Generation co-creator and producer Rick Berman with creating a new Star Trek series, the first without direct hands-on creative input from Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, who had recently passed away in October of 1991. Berman and Next Generation writer and story editor Michael Piller had worked with Roddenberry before he passed. While the specific concept for Deep Space Nine wasn't something they discussed with him, they at least had a sense of his vision for the future of the franchise and the places they could go. No matter how popular or successful The Next Generation was, there was a life cycle of increasing costs, decreasing revenue, and human fatigue that would inevitably result in the end of the series. In 1991, The Next Generation was already 5 years in. It was time to transition the TV cast to movies and start over with a new TV cast. As the project took shape, The Final Frontier was considered as a title for the new series, an homage to the mission of the Federation and the opening narration which defined the franchise. However, during development, the station was dubbed Deep Space Nine as a placeholder, and it endured not only as the name of the place, but of the series. Deep Space Nine was the first Star Trek series that wasn't set on a spaceship exploring the galaxy. After initially considering a series that was set on a planet, production decided to set it on a space station instead. Shooting on sets was cheaper than constantly shooting on location. But a static location was immediately contrary to what people expected from Star Trek. From the opening narration of the franchise, Star Trek had always been about exploring strange new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations, and boldly going where no one has gone before. But the reality is that there isn't much difference in terms of production and storytelling when it comes to the interior of a spaceship versus the interior of a space station. And besides, there was already a very successful series in its 5th season, carrying on the tradition of Star Trek on a ship exploring strange new worlds. Built into the DNA of Deep Space Nine was a goal of being in the world of Star Trek, but being very different from every previous series. That began with the design of the station itself. The Cardassian architecture set it apart from the slick Sid Mead style of the Federation. That visual menace reinforced the, quote, darker and more sinister vision director of photography Marvin Rush was asked to implement on screen.
Watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine Sunday nights at 8 on UPN 32, and you could be beaming to Star Trek The Experience at the Las Vegas Hilton.
Get those people out of trouble there too.
Each week in May, you'll see a trivia question during Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager. You'll be able to answer it by carefully watching that week's episode of Deep Space Nine. And you could win airfare for 4 to Las Vegas and a weekend in the 24th century, only on UPN 32's Primetime Invasion.
Contrast, or conflict, was the driving force behind every choice in the development. During the creation of Next Generation, Roddenberry had imagined that interpersonal conflict between crew members of a spacefaring ship would no longer be a social issue. He imagined a world where the crew, the mission, the Federation was prioritized above the self. While this was a novel concept for a future-looking science fiction television series, something to make it different from the series that came before, it was also a frustrating limitation for the writers. In Roddenberry's original vision for Next Generation, conflict could only be introduced from external forces, not just because after 3 years Geordi was done with the way Riker sits down in a chair.
Shown to her quarters with something like this here. You don't look like a person.
Something's wrong?
Counselor Troy. No, pure fiction. It's a made-up tale. This one was invented by a writer.
When it came to Deep Space Nine, the crew of the station was deliberately chosen to create as much interpersonal conflict as possible. A Starfleet commander who didn't want to be there, a Bajoran revolutionary who didn't trust anyone, and certainly not the Federation, a shape-shifting head of security, a serial thief, liar, and criminal in charge of entertainment, a fresh-faced know-it-all medical officer, and a science officer who is technically hundreds of years old. On top of that, Deep Space Nine is the optimal spot for alien species from all over the galaxy to pop in on their way to or from the wormhole. Characters from outside the Federation let the audience see the Federation from a different perspective, and setting it on a space station meant they didn't leave at the end of every episode, which forced them to deal with the long-term consequences of everyone's actions, which meant more drama. Commander Benjamin Sisko was played by Avery Brooks, at the time known mostly for his role as Hawk on the ABC drama Spencer for Hire from 1985 to 1989, and its short-lived spin-off, A Man Called Hawk. In fact, Sisko's physical appearance in the first 3 seasons of Deep Space Nine was designed specifically to create differences between Sisko and Hawk. It wasn't until season 3 that Brooks was able to regrow his goatee and shave his head. Nana Visitor played Major Kira, a character that was originally intended to be Ro Laren from Next Generation. The switch to Kira happened at the last second when Ro Laren actress Michelle Forbes declined to commit to Deep Space Nine. Constable Odo was played by Renee Auberjonois, mostly known for the role of Clayton on the sitcom Benson. Cole Meany played Chief of Operations Miles O'Brien, who was the transporter chief on the Enterprise during Next Generation. Alexander Siddig played Chief Medical Officer Julian Bashir. Terry Farrell played Jadzia Dax. Sirach Lofton was Commander Sisko's son Jake. Armin Shimmerman played Ferengi Quark, and Jeffrey Combs played Brunt and Weyoun. Weyoun, ironically, a shapeshifter, as Combs would go on to play 9 different characters across various Star Trek series throughout the franchise.
My body is a roadmap of pain.
After 3 seasons, ratings began to slip. Paramount wanted to shake up the status quo. 2 major changes occurred. First, while Deep Space Nine was already technically a spin-off of the very popular, very successful Next Generation, the connection was made even clearer by bringing Lieutenant Worf into the cast. Michael Dorn was initially hesitant to take on the role again due to the makeup procedure it required. However, the compensation package Paramount offered moved him to a bigger house. The second major change was to finally recognize Commander Sisko with the rank of Captain. Despite his position of authority, his rank as Commander, regardless of how much it made sense in narrative, was a glaring shift from previous series centered around their captains. Better late than never, I suppose. The ratings stall could have been caused by several factors, Star Trek fatigue included. It's likely that Deep Space Nine's shift towards serialized storytelling also contributed. Previous Star Trek shows generally resolved a plot by the end of the episode while occasionally producing a 2 or 3-parter. Deep Space Nine started out that way, but began to deal with longer and longer arcs that let writers pay off plot lines in bigger and more drastic ways. The problem with that approach is that audiences who are expecting to be able to jump in without having watched the last episode, much less 3 or 4 seasons worth of episodes, would be lost, and in the days before on-demand entertainment have no way to go back and get caught up, and wouldn't come back. Complicating matters further, as local television stations who purchased syndicated programming like Deep Space Nine became affiliates of larger networks, shows like Deep Space Nine lost their prime programming slots. Furthermore, Deep Space Nine was the first Star Trek series to be broadcast in competition with other Star Trek series. Deep Space Nine began airing during the last 2 seasons of The Next Generation, then continued during 5 seasons of Star Trek Voyager, not to mention First Contact in 1996 and Insurrection in 1998. Now that is Star Trek fatigue.
Chuffing, eh? You just want an easy life.
But some fans just never gave Deep Space Nine a chance at all. Its intentionally darker, more realistic approach wasn't Star Trek to them. They believed it wasn't in the spirit of Roddenberry's optimistic approach to the future. A greater case could be made for the science fiction fans who picked the other gritty, realistic space station show. Accusations persist through today that Deep Space Nine took everything that was interesting or original about its concept from J. Michael Straczynski's Babylon 5. Season 1 of Deep Space Nine began airing in January of 1993. Babylon 5's pilot movie aired a month later in February, followed by a regular season in January of 1994. However, Straczynski has publicly stated that he shopped Babylon 5 to Paramount back in 1989 before it was purchased by Warner Brothers. Paramount would have known all about Babylon 5, from concept to script to artwork and even plans for the first season worth of stories. And while Straczynski never blamed Deep Space Nine creators Rick Berman or Michael Piller directly, he was certain that the invisible hand of the Paramount executives were steering the Star Trek space station in a very specific direction.
After we shot the pilot, I got a call
from Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov on Star Trek, who was having lunch with a guy at Paramount. He said, I want you to know they're doing a show based on a space station, diplomatic outpost, jump gate nearby. They're trying to subvert what you're doing and co-opt it, because at that time Warner's and Paramount were doing two different competing networks. And they figured, well, we can take what they're doing in Babylon 5 and co-opt it, we can sell it and kill their show. So they actually were telling stations, if you buy Babylon 5, you can't have Deep Space Nine. They tried to sink us wherever they possibly could. They're going to look like crap. They told people that our Babylon 5 look cheap and terrible. They did everything they possibly could to stop us.
You never wanted to take it into any kind of legal battle?
I did. I wanted to sue their asses off. But Warner said, look, if we sue them, they'll countersue us. Both shows could be lost in litigation and you'll never get your opportunity. So I bit the bullet and didn't take action because Warner's owned the show at that point. So we had to sort of sit back and watch them try and eat our lunch every week.
On the other hand, Rick Berman denies all of those claims. Whether Paramount was aware of Babylon 5 prior to the development of Deep Space Nine or not, it had not affected his or Pillar's work. He said, quote, "We had no knowledge of this gentleman. If he did pitch something to Paramount, we never heard about it. So when we were accused of stealing his idea, it was a little sad, but at the same time, a little comical to us."
Joe, what? I can't believe this shit.
Deep Space Nine was canceled after fulfilling its original 7-year mission as planned by Tartikoff and Berman before it began. It inspired the creation of dozens of novels, comic books, video games, and action figures, playsets, role-play toys, and a myriad of other licensed merchandise. Brandon Tartikoff was integral to the creation of Deep Space Nine. His contribution to the continuation of the franchise was recognized after his death in 1997 with an in memory of dedication in the closing title card to the Season 6 episode, A Time to Stand. Deep Space Nine explored a sector of the Star Trek galaxy that had never been explored before, both literally and figuratively. In the process, it racked up 32 Emmy nominations, winning 4. Its 7-season run proved the skeptics wrong and won back many of the fans who initially demurred. It was the proving ground for writers who would develop the next generation of science fiction television. Shows like the 2004 reboot of Battlestar Galactica, the 4400, Farscape, Medium, Outlander all counted former Deep Space Nine producers and writers among their creative staff. And obviously, it wasn't the end of the franchise. Counting Voyager, there have been 8 additional series and 4 feature films. The most recent series, Strange New Worlds, has already been renewed for a 3rd and 4th season to be aired on Paramount Plus in the future. In 2019, What We Left Behind, a crowd-funded documentary about Deep Space Nine, was released. It features extensive interviews with cast, crew, and fans, and even shows a writer's session where the outline for a theoretical 8th season is mapped out. A testament not only to the Star Trek franchise, but to Deep Space Nine and the role it played in expanding the mythology, boldly going where no Star Trek series had gone before. Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy. Several different tiers to address your specific Secret Galaxy content needs. Check out our new Secret Galaxy merch shop at secretgalaxy.shop. All merchandise is physically in stock and ready to ship. Links to all of this in the description below. And let us know in the comments down below if you're a Niner. I was gonna make a joke about what the subset of Star Trek fans would be called Beyond Trekkies, but apparently Niners is already a thing that exists. I'm not a Niner myself. I watched some of it when it aired originally, and I was definitely more of a Next Generation fan and absolutely more of a Star Wars fan. Not that I want to get into that. It's all good space adventure fun. Let's have peace between the factions and explore strange new forces together.
So diplomatic. Cut.